Jonathan Dean, Seattle Opera dramaturg, here today to give you an opera talk all about sin. And I'm joined by one of my favorite literary sinners, Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, as painted by Gustave Doré. Now, sin and opera indulging in sin. We were planning a little opera talk here, and we wanted to figure out for you moralists out there if we could do a counterpart. Opera explores the four cardinal virtues, whatever they are, prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. Nope, couldn't think of a single opera that had anything to do with that. Opera tends to go to sin, which is extremely dramatic in many cases, and of course, music can do wonders, connecting us to these kinds of experiences. So it's a little bit more richer to, as I say, go into how opera indulges in the seven deadly sins. Now, what I want to do in this podcast is give you a little introduction to our seven deadly sins and a little taste of music for each one. A little overview first, and as I say, you could go to pretty much any opera. We've got operas now coming out every Saturday morning, Seattle Opera Mornings on King FM at 10 a.m. So I think last weekend was Trovatore. Oh, loads. Pretty much all the sins are covered in that one. The sins in Trovatore, like many operas, comes from Italy. And in the Italian Catholic tradition, there's a very specific way of thinking about the sins. It's actually quite different from a lot of our American tradition. Actually, you can find the Italian tradition or theology explored wonderfully, beautifully, artistically in Dante, in the Divine Comedy from a medieval writer. And if you remember your Dantean geography, the Mountain of Purgatory is how you get up to the gateway to paradise, but you have to purge each sin at each level, and the tougher sins are the ones that are lower down, and you're sort of, the refiner's fire are cleaning off. It's a little bit like going to the dentist. You get rid of the big chunks of plaque down here, the really deadly sins, and then these are the more bodily sins. There are seven sins: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. And as that list of names suggests, opera, you'll find lots of these delightful characteristics in opera. And again, the point of opera being that opera music gets on the inside of the characters and connects us with them. So while we're all of us sinners, most of us, hopefully not too much, but we probably know something about some of these sins, and the music helps us see all the full complexity of these kinds of situations. Well, let's go ahead and start with lust, which, like its buddies gluttony and greed, is understood as a sin of excess. It's good to enjoy love and to enjoy physical beauty and the body and to procreate. Yes, that's important in the theology, but the lust is for when you overdo it, when you get fixated on it, when you can't do anything else. Now, we have lots and lots and lots of that going on in opera. The one I wanted to share with you is the character of Tannhäuser in great opera by Richard Wagner. Wagner was well acquainted with lust and could write great music for it. Tannhäuser, in fact, is a character who's sort of torn between two worlds. He is a medieval minstrel, and he spent time, before the opera begins, he spent time underground in the kind of pagan, sensual, carnal indulgence of Venusberg, the land of Venus, and all of the kind of Greek and classical Roman type characters, fauns and satyrs and nymphs, who just cavort in a great big orgy all day long. And Tannhäuser was Venus's lover, but he leaves her at the beginning of the opera because he wants to go back up to sort of the surface of the earth and see what's going on among his own people, human beings. Except it's a very kind of almost puritanical, repressed German medieval society that he enters, and they find out where he's been, and absolutely not. You are ostracized, you're verboten. The Pope himself says to Tannhäuser, you will never be redeemed. Absolutely, what you've done is so inexcusable. And so Tannhäuser says, well, I might as well at least enjoy the pleasures of lust, and slips right back into it. So here's a little bit of music, I'll get rid of myself, from Wagner, as I say, doing... Wagnerian lust music tends to sound like a Victoria's Secret catalog. Here's Tannhäuser getting back into the obsession despite his best friend Wolfram, who's trying to keep him on the straight and narrow. Doesn't work very well. Here you go.
Fühlst du nicht wilde Lüfte? zu mir, es ist um dich getan. Und tat es nicht, weil du dich es nicht um meine Klänge in wildem Schauer weht die Brust. Was ist damit bekannt zu der Menge? Herbei, 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 zu Wonne und Lust. Die böse Zauber tut sie sich auf, die Hölle naht, die Himmel auf. Entzücken dringt durch meine Sinne, erfahre ich diesen Dämmerschein. Ich verdaue meine Finde, in Venusberg drangen wir ein.
And you have the sultry sound of the mezzo-soprano as the temptress Venus welcoming Tannhäuser back. Well, there's more to the story than that, but yeah, great music to depict the seduction of lust. Well, lust is having too much of a good thing, so is our next sin, gluttony. Another one, many of us are well acquainted with this particular sin. Food is good. It's good to enjoy the fruits of the world and to take pleasure in that, but it's also very easy to overdo it. Here, in fact, it's something that we do pretty early on in life, an infantile sin. Here's an opera in which the sinners are small children, Hansel and Gretel. And again, in the German tradition, for some reason, it's always the mezzo who's the devil, the seducer. In this case, the witch, who's tempting little Hansel and Gretel with a sort of a shopping list of everything that a little German child would find delicious and delightful in the 1890s when this opera was written. Here's Christa Ludwig as our witch, using kind of a funny witch voice. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Pretty tempting. Okay, one more of these sort of sins of the flesh, or sins of, excess, wanting too much of a good thing. The other one is just greed. Mine, 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 gimme, 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 gimme. It's all mine, my precious. Greed is a very common trait in a lot of opera characters. It's actually a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what it sounds like. Our icon here for greed is got a money bag, and that's often used. And I do have some musical money bag going on for you in a moment from Falstaff. Falstaff's one of my favorite operas. Giuseppe Verdi doing Shakespeare, and Falstaff is he's sort of a world-class sinner. Falstaff is a beloved character because he commits pretty much every sin there is, and yet we all love him because he's kind of exactly what all of us would do if we could get away with it. And also, Falstaff's sins don't actually hurt anybody else. They mostly just make him look ridiculous. Anyways, at this point, we actually have a slightly more serious sin going on with our other baritone on stage, Ford, who's tempting Falstaff, because Ford is the kind of greedy, possessive person who wants to own his wife. News has come to Ford, patriarchal kind of Italian baritone, dude, that his wife there might be something up between his wife and this much, much, much more sort of sophisticated, worldly, higher class guy. Ford, we know from Shakespeare, was kind of trade. He was a shopkeeper, married above him, and has never really trusted his wife. So he goes to Falstaff to bribe him into trying to seduce Alice, and you'll hear the little money bag music when we get to the stage direction.
Ve lo dirò, voi siete un gentiluomo, prode, arguto, facondo. Voi siete l'uom di guerra, voi siete l'uom di mondo, non fa tutto, e quelle un sacco di monete. Spendete, spendete, si spendete, spendete, tutto il mio patrimonio, siate ricco e felice, ma in contraccambio chiedo che conquistiate Alice. Strana ingiunzione.
I love Falstaff so much. What a fun opera. So much brilliant wit in the mating of every word and every note in that piece. So you do have to sort of follow it with a very fine attention. Anyways, those were our first three sins. As I say, those are the ones that you kind of you'll polish those off later. You got some more serious sins, and actually, sin number 4, sloth. It's not super well represented in opera simply because it's not very dramatic to watch a lazy slugabed who never gets up and does anything. In fact, sloth is a sin understood as not a sin of excess like those first three, but a sin of not enough. The slothful person does not love God enough to follow through and do the thing that you're there to do, is not taking part in the world. Now, there are a couple opera characters who do this. My favorite is, again, one of those multi-layered sinners, Fafner from The Ring. Fafner is not a pleasant character at all, and he's got other sins. He's certainly greedy and wrathful. He bludgeons his brother to death at the end of Das Rheingold. But for the thing about Fafner is he has the ring for most of the 4 operas that comprise the ring, and he doesn't do anything with it. He's a dragon, and he just basically sleeps on this big pile of gold. Even when they come and they're like, okay, this is the end. Somebody's coming for you, Fafner, and he's got a magic sword. You better watch out. Fafner's famous line here is the sort of musical quintessence of sloth. I think it even has a kind of a stage direction of yawn, as you say, schlafen. Delightful character. Why is he a dragon? He was a giant in opera number 1. Technically, in the sort of the machinations of the Ring's plot, that's because he's got the magic helmet, which allows you to change your shape. But in the myths and in the way this kind of story works, a dragon is any holdfast tyrant, and you turn into a dragon just by as greed and then sloth. You're going to be stuck with all that stuff, and all these energies is going to be bottled up and locked away. That's now our gateway into a different kind of sin. Those first sins we've talked about mostly hurt yourself. Our final 3 sins are directed at others, and that's why they're more dangerous and they're more deadly. And ultimately, the nastiest of them all is a crime against God. But next up on our list is wrath, and I got a good wrathful character for you there, the Queen of the Night. Actually, there's loads of opera characters who indulge in wrath. The rage aria is a classic opera thing that we love to sing about how angry we are. This one, probably one of the most famous rage arias ever composed. And yes, it's all very chirpy and beautiful, and the coloratura pyrotechnics are wild when she gets to the vocalese. But this is a very scary bit of wrath directed at her daughter. She's going to disown her daughter unless she murders somebody for her. So yeah, angry woman. music I'm guessing a lot of you all probably know already because it's a pretty familiar one. Now, for our next sin, envy, I've got music that might be less familiar, but I think is a very, very powerful and beautiful opera and a really interesting and disturbing character, Claggart, from Billy Budd by Benjamin Britten, based on the novel by Herman Melville. And the story is, yeah, there's a lot of sin going on, particularly pride, I think, when we get to Claggart. But ultimately, it's a question of envy. It has been suggested that this is actually lust. They're all on a boat. Billy is impressed. This is the British Navy in the 1790s. We're fighting Napoleon. We're fighting the French. And Claggart is sort of a middle manager on the boat. And he takes this absolutely insane, irrational dislike to Billy the minute he sets foot on the boat. And as I say, it has been said that, oh, it's lust, and his problem is that he falls madly in love with Billy and can't deal with that, can't admit that to himself, and that's why he turns into this demented psychopath. But actually, if you look very closely at Melville's novel, I mean, it's not that that's not there, it's that even more than that, there's this issue of envy, the darkness, who can't be part of the light and thus needs to destroy it. That's envy that's going on here. Claggart envies the fact that Billy is naturally charismatic and that everybody on the boat is drawn to him. They're both described as handsome. Claggart as sort of a demonic handsomeness, Billy as angelic. And, the sort of natural leadership that Billy immediately exerts, even though he doesn't want to be there, it's very easy for him, and Claggart resents that. And in great music here in his monologue towards the end of Act 1, sets himself on a self-defeat, destructive course, because Claggart isn't going to survive this either, of having to get rid of this thing that makes his world completely intolerable.
Nothing, nothing, nothing. So may it be. So may it be. For what hope remains if love can escape? If love still lives and grows strong, where I cannot enter, what hope is there in my own dark world for me? I cannot believe it. No, that were John Claggart, master at arms upon the indomitable, have you in my power, and I will destroy you. I will destroy you.
Benjamin Britten was always deeply committed to stories of moral issues, good and evil, the loss of innocence, that kind of thing, and wrote fantastic music for it in opera after opera. Well, we've worked our way up to some pretty big sins here. The biggest one of all still to come, and that is pride. Pride is understood as the deadliest of the seven deadly sins in the old Catholic tradition because it sets up a rivalry between yourself and God. And actually, this is something that the Catholics got from the antique religions as well, where it's known as hubris, if you're thinking about Greek tragedy. Hubris is when any of those, mighty kings or whatever from ancient tragedy start thinking that they're really hot stuff. Pretty soon, you stop remembering that you're supposed to be humble in front of God, and you commit the biggest sin of all of this kind of arrogant hubris pride. Now, we love this kind of thing in opera. We've got loads and loads and loads and loads of opera characters who, in their tragedy, fall through pride. I want to give you one that you might not immediately think of, but certainly the composer understood pride to be the ultimate problem with Princess Turandot. Now, Princess Turandot, if you remember, is this frozen ice princess sort of archetype, and the most beautiful woman in the world. Every man who sees her immediately falls in love and wants to marry her. And she makes them take a test to apply to marry the princess. And if you fail the test, you get your head chopped off. In fact, our costume designer here has given us all the severed heads of a lot of the former suitors of the princess. To Puccini, who composed the opera, it's really a wall of pride that she has erected. I am the greatest person on earth. No one is worthy of me. No one can come anywhere near me or touch me. In order, obviously she's got a lot of fears going on as well, but this is going to not only cause a great deal of damage, like lots of, dead potential and these guys shot down, but limit, herself and turn her kingdom into this kind of nightmare dystopia. So over the course of the opera, we try to get her over her wall of pride. There's a wonderful moment at the end of Act 2 where this guy shows up, this tenor that nobody knows, that's his name, the unknown prince, and he passes the tests, and then she still says, no, 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 I don't want to do it, I don't want to marry him, I don't want to, Dad, don't make me, I can't, and she sort of whines about it for a while. Builds up into this fantastic climactic ensemble, and in this, pay close attention to the high notes. Here's Turandot singing above the crowd. When she gets down to here, she'll sing 2 high Cs in a row, and then listen to how he answers. Music from Act 2 of Turandot. And it turns out that the only remedy for overweening pride is someone who can sing an even bigger high note than you. So there's a quick little tour of our 7 deadly sins. Now, our opera coming up this weekend, Tosca, features a great sinner, Baron Scarpia. He's got multiple layers of sin going on, and I encourage you to study that as you listen to the opera on Saturday morning, Tosca from Seattle Opera, starring the one and only Greer Grimsley. Thanks for joining me today for this opera talk, and thank you for your support and interest in Seattle Opera.